Namaskar. Aarti Tikoo Singh is my guest for the day. She is a senior multimedia journalist based in New Delhi with 2 decades of experience as a reporter, editor, and columnist. She is currently Foreign and Strategic Affairs Editor of Indo-Asian News Service (IANS), India's largest independent wire agency. She has worked earlier at the Times of India, Hindustan Times, and briefly at United Nations, BBC, and Columbia University. Aarti ji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaskar, Sree. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
And I might add that Tikoo is also an alumni of Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. So today we are going to talk with Aarti ji about her experiences in what she saw, what she faced when she deposed in front of various congressional committees in the United States. There's one in particular that we are going to talk about. And how is this conversation relevant, you might ask? Well, on the 29th of April, the Santa Clara Human Rights Commission, 12 people board, met to try and see if the caste system of Hinduism should be designated a protected category. Those of you who don't know what Santa Clara County is, this is the heart of Silicon Valley. This is where I live. This is where Google is headquartered. This is where Apple is headquartered. And if I'm not wrong, perhaps even Netflix is headquartered here. So if you take a look at all the top IT companies, the FANG they call them, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, 3 out of those 5 are headquartered here. And some of the rulings that will come down the pipe on this one will have to be adhered to by them. So this is a fake narrative by a fake organization with fake credentials which is trying to do this. Now let's try and take a look at what is happening in what happened that day at the resolution. As an anti-India, anti-Hindu resolutions are being passed, we are having this happening like a rash across Democrat-controlled councils. One wonders who is behind this orchestrated campaign. Aarti Tikoo Singh will now lay bare the dark and ugly side of US Congressman women as she was asked to depose a few years ago at the Congress in in connection with Kashmir. The context, what happened, let's listen to it in her own words. Aarti ji, sorry for the lamba chauda introduction, but you have the stage now.
Thank you, Sree. First of all, let me really express my gratitude for inviting me to your forum. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be getting interviewed by you, a man with tremendous accomplishment, a son of the soil, and we all are proud here of you for whatever you have achieved there in the US. Also, I wanted to really praise you for the kurta that you're wearing. It's a gorgeous kurta.
Thank
and
you.
I really love the little stole that you're wearing. Having said that, let me now talk about serious business, which is what really happened in 2019, October 22, when I deposed before the US Congressional hearing, which was chaired by Congressman Brad Sherman. I think a lot of people did hear that hearing in India. I'm not sure whether the Indian community, the NRI community in the US heard that hearing. But I want to, before I really get into that hearing, I want to say something which has been weighing on my mind for a long time. Many people criticized me, many people were upset with me after listening to my hearing. But at the same time, the entire country back home in India at that point of time, when I was there in the US, stood by me. They showed support, and they were on the same page as I in terms of what I had said in the US Congress that day. Why am I talking about the criticism? Because somewhere I felt that people were upset that I did not give it back to the US Congress that day in the tone and manner which I should have. I really feel that I should have spoken aggressively, and I should have given it back to each one of them who cornered me and who tried to paint me as a spokesperson of the oppressive regime, the so called oppressive regime in India. Uh, and I think, I held myself back because, in many ways, that particular day was a turning point in my life. Whatever I experienced, whatever I saw in that hearing became a watershed moment in my both professional and personal life. I will come to that, how it happened, why it happened. But I want to tell your audience today that that one hearing has changed me forever. It was an epiphany of sorts, because that day I understood the real meaning of the brutality of geopolitics of the world, as if a huge veil had been lifted from my eyes that day, because what I saw was the complete unscrupulousness of the US Congress. What I experienced was the ruthlessness, the brutality, and also, in a way, I would say, unethical display of the depraved democracy of the United States of America. And I cannot believe that I'm saying this because I used to be a staunch champion and a staunch, uh, you know, uh, in a way, you can say also in a way, spokesperson or a cheerleader of the American democracy, because for me, America was at the zenith, when we talked in terms of freedoms, when we talked in terms of democracy or institutions. For me, America was at the peak. For me, America idealized everything that was wonderful about the world, that was wonderful about democracy, that was wonderful about human rights, that was wonderful about institution building, and above all, fact finding. But that particular day, I realized that American democracy is as hollow as you would say today. In fact, in hindsight, I realized that it is as hollow and as unscrupulous as the Chinese authoritarian system. There isn't much difference between how these two imperialistic powers are behaving, even if you look at what is happening right now in the world because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, let me get back to how that hearing happened and why I was in that hearing. On August 5th, 2019, Prime Minister Modi and his government, they reorganized the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which had been granted special status within the Constitution of India in 1950 when India became a republic. And Jammu and Kashmir, therefore, was, a special state because of Article 370 within the Constitution of India. Since the government reorganized Jammu and Kashmir state and bifurcated it into two union territories, one of Ladakh and one of Jammu and Kashmir, the Article 370 and Article 35A, which pertain to the permanent residency laws of Jammu and Kashmir, which had, in a way, kept Jammu and Kashmir cut off and disintegrated in many ways from the rest of India because of the reorganization of the state. Article 370 and 35A got nullified. Now, this is the most historic decision that any government in India has taken since the birth of India as a democracy, as a republic, and as a nation state. Therefore, I, as a journalist who has covered Jammu and Kashmir for a very long time, I started my career as a journalist based in Jammu and Kashmir. Despite the fact that I am a displaced Kashmiri Pandit, but I went back to Kashmir starting 2001 2002 after a gap of 12 years. I had left as a child from Kashmir in 1990 and went back as an adult professional in Kashmir to cover not just terror but every other aspect of life as well in Kashmir post the cross border terrorism started erupted in Jammu and Kashmir in 1990. Now, since I had been going to Kashmir, it was obviously logical for me to go on August 5th, 2019 as well, because this was a momentous thing that had happened, and I was there on the ground to cover the situation in Kashmir for the newspaper I was working at that time, which is the Times of India, the largest English newspaper at the time. So I was there as a journalist and I went around. I covered this entire valley. I spoke to hundreds of people and I reported as fairly and as objectively as any conscientious journalist would. I came back to Delhi, and in the meantime, what I saw coming out from the international press on Kashmir was complete fabrication of a narrative that did not really exist on the ground. For example, many people in the Western press wrote as if Kashmir had been usurped by India, as if there was a siege laid by the Indian security forces in Kashmir, which is completely nonsensical because anyone who has covered Kashmir in the last 30 years, ever since terrorism broke out in Kashmir, would know that Kashmir has been an abnormal state because of Pakistan's cross border terrorism. And yet, none of these journalists, whether it was Washington Post, whether it was Wall Street Journal, whether it was Guardian, any newspaper, any news channel which is based outside India, none of them really gave the true picture of what was happening. And moreover, what they really forgot to do, or maybe I don't think it was forgetfulness, I think it was a deliberate, conscious choice to project that narrative in that light because that's the position of their respective governments. And when I say respective governments, I mean to say that America's take on Kashmir, for example, has always been pro-Pakistan stand until very recently, until September 11. America was on the same page as Pakistan. It called cross-border terror in Kashmir as freedom struggle of Kashmir. Bill Clinton said this. President Bill Clinton was in favor of Azadi for Kashmir. So from that point to this point, that that American media and foreign media was projecting the reorganization of Kashmir as if it was a war on Kashmiri Muslims, not a war on entire Jammu and Kashmir, which is a very heterogeneous state. It has Hindus, it has Buddhists, it has Dogras, it has Gujars and Bakarwals, but they pinpointedly made it a Muslim, an anti-Muslim, and anti-Islamic thing. So in that context, I felt that this narrative which was being peddled by the foreign media was incorrect, and therefore I on social media reached out to Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and other newspapers asking them to provide me space to put the right narrative in the right perspective along with the context, because without history, without the right context, you cannot understand any conflict, you cannot understand any geopolitical issue if you don't know what its history is. So a friend responded to me in an email saying that he can help me with reaching out to somebody in the US who might be able to help me with finding some column space in a newspaper. I suppose the easiest connection was the Kashmiri Hindu, Kashmiri Pandit Overseas Association. He put me in touch with them. For some reason, they said that they don't really have any connections, any network with the American media, and couldn't really help me. But they invited me for a seminar which they were going to hold on Kashmir. That did not somehow work, and in between, Hindu American Society, Hindu American Foundation, they reached out to me saying that they can help me with reaching out to press and also reaching out to some think tanks where I could speak on Kashmir and where I could where I could provide my insights and what I witnessed as a journalist on the ground. And in between, what happens is that Hindu American Foundation also nominated me for this US Congressional hearing, which was happening on Kashmir so called human rights situation after August 5th, 2019. Now, as it is, there was an underlying assumption, which was a wrong assumption, that as if there was some human rights violations being perpetrated by the Indian state in Kashmir, which was completely false, because the only human rights violations that really happened after August 5th were the violations committed by Pakistan-sponsored Islamic jihadis who killed people for opening shops, who massacred people for defying their diktats. So, therefore, I agreed, and I went to that US Congressional hearing as a witness. And I, being this very principled and conscientious journalist, I thought that I have done my homework very well. I understand the history and the context of Kashmir's conflict. I understand in what circumstances the government has taken this decision. And I was in favor of this decision even before the government took that decision. I was always in favor of, I wouldn't say always, but I would say that ever since I figured out Kashmir conflict, I was in favor of this solution. So I went to that congressional hearing knowing that I am the witness who's been on the ground. Whereas if you really looked at that panel which participated in that hearing, it comprised of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the experience of post August 5th, 2019 Kashmir. None of the panelists had witnessed or had visited Kashmir after August 5th. None of them had any experience as a Kashmiri. Since I am a Kashmiri, I have an added, I would say, qualification to be there as a witness, because I am a Kashmiri. I have seen the conflict unfolding in front of my eyes in 80s. And then I went as a journalist who covered Kashmir for all those years when militancy and terrorism was at its peak. And yet all these panelists, for example, Angana Chatterjee, who was not even allowed to land in India because she worked with a convicted felon in the US, Ghulam Nabi Fai, a known ISI agent in America, who got convicted because he did not even declare, he kept this concealed that he was working on behalf of the Pakistani army and the ISI. So Angana Chatterjee was his lackey. She worked with him. Natasha Cole, who has had no experience of 1990 terrorism in Kashmir, who has had no experience of the events that unfolded in the 90s or in 2000s. She's a wannabe Arundhati Roy and wannabe so-called, human rights activists who, uh, like everybody else in the UK, US, ISI, Pakistan network, also milked the Kashmir issue for her own, self-aggrandizement and for her own career promotion in the UK. Similarly, there were other people also. There was one Pakistani, can you imagine, who has had no connection whatsoever with Kashmir except for that his heart was crying very loud for Kashmiris without knowing what was really happening in Kashmir. So, this panel, which was completely set up by Brad Sherman, the chairman of that committee, of course, when you have a completely slanted panel, you have to be really naive not to see that it's slanted and it's being bought. It's been there is a financial deal that has happened behind the scenes. That is why all these characters are there, who actually are completely discredited as witnesses of so-called human rights violations in Kashmir. And when Ilhan Omar, who's a well-known Islamist, it's not just Aarti Tikoo saying that she's a well-known Islamist. If you look at Tariq Fatah, who's one of the, I would say, one of the brightest scholars on Islam, who's one of the brightest writers on Islamism in not just South Asia and not just in Pakistan and India, but also in the rest of the world. He's written uh, three at least two great books on the subject. You read his pieces on what Ilhan Omar is. You read so many other, for example, Asra Nomani, who's a very good writer, who was a journalist with Wall Street Journal, what she has been writing about Ilhan Omar. So many people within the Muslim community have pointed out the problems with Ilhan Omar's politics. They have pointed out her unscrupulousness vis-a-vis politics in the US. I mean, she cannot bring herself to condemn Al Qaeda. She could not even call it a terror organization. And this is the woman. Uh, Sree, please interrupt me if I'm going on and on, and
No,
if I'm
finish that line, and I'll tell you what I have to say. Go ahead.
yeah. And this is the woman who had the gall to come to the US congressional hearing with a script which she read out, and it was targeted at me. It was targeted personally at me, and she did not even give me the chance to rebut her. And instead, Pramila Jaipal, her I would say gang member, she also went from one panelist to another, from Natasha to Angana to all the fraudsters in that panel, asking them and endorsing their point of view and empathizing with them, which is a complete charade, because Pramila Jaipal, I don't think, is capable of empathy. If you look at, this is the woman who uses her Indian identity for her politics when it suits her, but shuns it completely when it doesn't suit her. So it's a shame that Indians are even allowing her to use her Indian identity, because I don't think she's an Indian in any sense of the word.
So let me
So
just give you 2 cents on what I think is happening in the United States Congress. There is this progressive group, and one of the core elements of the progressive group is calls themselves the Squad. The Squad consists of members such as Ilan Omar, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio, Pramila Jaipal, Rashida Tlaib, I mean, a few other people that I may have missed. It's okay. But I just want to put the proper context here for our viewers. Viewers, when she was asked about 9/11, Ilan Omar said, some people did something. I mean, one thing that especially the members of the Squad and also many members in Congress seem to forget is once you are elected to that post as a congressman, congresswoman, You represent your entire constituency, not just those who put you there, not those who voted you there. There is a remaining 30, 40, sometimes 45%. Those voices also have to be represented by you. It behooves you to do that. That is why you are the representative. You are not the representative of the small but significant minority that voted you there. And Pramila Jayapal, what can I say? I mean, you want Indian American votes, but you will not listen to Indian American voices. And there are some other people like this, Ro Khanna, but I'm glad that there are some others also. Radhakrishnamurthy is much more, he's much more centered. I see that as mature leadership, and this is important because US consists of many people. Many countries are represented here. Meritocracy finds its home here, and we need to kind of try to keep that in mind when we go to Congress. I'm sure Ilan Omar's office is watching this, Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, everybody. You guys watch it for all you want. None of you can suppress RTG's voice. Whether it's up to you whether you want to listen to it or turn it off. But I'm going to let RTG have her say here today. Please continue.
Thank you, Sree. So the point is that Pramila Jaipal, she is an unconscionable politician, and all she cares for is power. She's a power-hungry politician. Otherwise, how dare she talked about religious freedoms being suppressed in Kashmir? The only religious freedom that has been suppressed in Kashmir was that of Kashmiri Hindus, and she did not have a word on that. She did not have the moral she did not have the morality to point out that an entire ethnic minority of Kashmiri Hindus had been subjected to genocide in Kashmir in 1990. And she went on talking about religious freedom of Kashmiri Muslims. The only demographic change that has happened in Kashmir is that of Kashmiri Hindus who've been wiped out through seven sequential genocides. The only question that she should have asked that day would have been to me that please tell us what has happened in Kashmir. But she did not ask me that question. Instead, she gave me her judgment. She went around telling every panelist how great they were and how fabulous they were. Natasha Cole, who had come there as an academic, talking eloquence about intersectionality of identities, as if she's the epitome of intersectionality, as if Pramila Jaipal is, or as if anybody else was, because they're not. The real, if you really want to talk about intersectionality of identity, I will tell you what that means. It means Aarti Tikoo, a displaced Kashmiri Hindu who went back to Kashmir as a dispassionate journalist who wrote stories not only about Kashmiri Hindus but also Kashmiri Muslims. Even in that hearing, I spoke not only about Kashmiri Hindus. In fact, I did not even I made it a point that I went there as a conscientious journalist. I went there as a witness and not as a representative of displaced Kashmiri Pandits, which I actually had a choice to do. I could have done that, but I didn't do that because for me, it was important that I delivered on my duty, and my obligation was to be a truthful journalist, which all of them denied me. All of them accused me. They leveled allegations and yet did not give me the chance to speak back. And you know what I really felt? I have been, I think when I came out of that congressional hearing, I really felt like that country bumpkin. James Stewart played this role in a movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's how I felt. Because in that movie there's a character who goes to Washington DC. He goes there with all his innocence and he thinks the world about the American democracy and the White House and the Capitol Hill, and then he comes face to face like as I did with the brutality and the unscrupulousness and the depraved system of American democracy. And
And
that's why it was for me an eye-opening moment, because I could see that the entire hearing was a setup not against only India, but it was a setup against Aarti Tikoo, because every person who was given a chance to lash out at me knew who Aarti Tikoo was. They knew I was a displaced Kashmiri Hindu. They knew I was a Hindu. They knew I was an Indian. They knew that I was a journalist with integrity and I was telling them the truth. And they did not want the world to know the truth that it was America that supported Pakistan's cross border terrorism in Kashmir till September 11. Even after that, for a long time, they looked the other way. They turned the other way. And it was only in the last few years when Trump administration really pushed Pakistan to at FATF and pushed Pakistan by withdrawing their aid and many other things. But throughout, America's position was that of Pakistan on Kashmir. Therefore, what I want to really say today, Sree, that American democracy was an ideal in my mind because I was innocent and ignorant. It was like a shrine in my mind. It was like a temple which could not. It was so sacrosanct in my mind, and I thought that it can never do anything wrong. At least the Congress cannot do. At least the Capitol Hill, the Congress and the Senate together cannot really do anything wrong, because they hold themselves accountable, because there is transparency. But that day, I discovered that fact finding, truth finding is not their mission. Their mission is to do politics because that was in their interest. It was not in the interest of America to let down its ally, the so called ally, Pakistan, but they were willing to let down India because, in the bigger scheme of things, India has never been their, strategic interest. It's Pakistan which they find a strategic ally.
thank you very much, Aarti ji. I'm sorry to put you through this ordeal of having to recollect what happened a couple of years ago, but it's still fresh in many minds. And I want to also set the context here a little bit. During the lead up to the 2020 presidential elections, I was very disappointed with some of the statements that the Democratic candidates did. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and most disappointed was Kamala Harris, who's now the vice president. She made some very interesting observations about Kashmir. And I can tell you, Madam Vice President, now I'm respectfully addressing you. You know, you used to be the Attorney General of California. You know, there was a shooting in our neighborhood called Gilroy about a couple of years ago when they had to take down the internet for 90 minutes because they were fearing that there will be repeat attacks on based of one information intelligence that they got from apprehending one of the shooters. They thought there were many people and that this could get repeated in many malls because it could have been a synchronized attempt. So what they did, this is the US police. They shut down the internet for 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it took when they were sure that they had captured all the terrorists or the people who were the gunmen. Let's not say terrorists, gunmen, whatever it is. But a developed country like in America has to resort to this to try and prevent fake narratives being peddled. How can you then turn around and tell India, oh, after you passed abrogated Article 370, you took away internet also for an extended period of time? India is a developing country, for God's sake. And also remember that you go, and this is again something that all those people in the panelists should have asked RTG about. You go around and look at Kashmir, Kashmiri boys and girls, the young diaspora, they don't look poor to me. They look very rich. And I wonder where that money is coming from. Anyway, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that's a very important observation that you made about Kashmir. If you really look at conflict zones in the rest of the world and then compare them with Kashmir, you will see a stark difference. The difference is this: Kashmir does not look like a conflict zone, and it's not Aarti Tikoo or Sree ji alone saying it. It's been reported by New York Times, I think 30 years ago, when New York Times, not 30 or maybe 25 years ago, when New York Times sent its correspondent to Kashmir to cover the conflict. Uh, the correspondent was shocked, and in fact, she wrote a piece in NYT, which NYT published at that point of time for some reason. And she pointed out that Kashmir does not look like a conflict zone because all I see is bungalows and mansions, and there is wealth around in Kashmir. So somebody has to really use common sense that what conflict are we really talking about when we talk about Kashmir? What persecution by the Indian state are we talking about? How is it that Kashmir, which and compared to Jammu region, for example, or compared to Ladakh region, which was earlier part of Jammu and Kashmir state, Kashmir was far, far more advanced, prosperous, and also had a higher living standard than both the regions. If you look at the kind of backwardness in Ladakh region or in Jammu region, you'll be astonished. You will feel that there has been no government for the last 70 years. But in Kashmir, there is not a single spot in the entire valley where you would feel that, there is poverty. Every person in Kashmir has a house. You cannot say the same about Delhi. You cannot say the same about any other state in India. But the kind of narrative that Pakistan peddle. So here's the thing: Pakistan, which is notorious in the entire world, including the US, after September 11. At the end of the day, Osama bin Laden, who killed over 3,000 Americans, he was found in Pakistan being sheltered by the Pakistani state. He was killed without the knowledge of Pakistani state. I mean, that's what the Americans claimed. And therefore, Pakistan's narrative on Kashmir, how can it even be true? It's a very commonsensical question. But Pramila Jayapal, who has some fanboys and girls within the NRI community in the US, they really need to, ask her these questions. They need to ask her that does Pramila Jayapal know that over 15,000 Kashmiri Muslim civilians were killed by Pakistani Islamic jihadis in the last 30 years? Can any of these fanboys and girls who are, who think that Pramila Jayapal mauled me because she's eloquent and Aarti Tikoo is not? Of course, I never claimed to be a speaker or an orator or claim to be, if I was an orator or a speaker, I would have been in the business of politics. If I was a debater, I would have been running a TV news channel. But I'm not. I have been a print journalist all my life, and I went to that US Congressional hearing. And even today, if I'm speaking on platforms, I speak only as a very ordinary journalist who has worked honestly, who has worked very hard in life, because I did not come from any patronage. I did not have any political influence. I did not have any financial backing. I was a displaced Kashmiri Hindu. My family, part of my family was in a refugee camp. I am a self-taught person and a self-made person in many ways. So Pramila Jayapal, and with all her eloquence, I think it's actually an insult if somebody compares me with her or Ilhan Omar, because I would really take offense if I'm compared with them, even if they are eloquent and articulate and whatever hell they are. I really take it as an offense, because to me, they represent dishonesty. To me, they represent immoral, depraved politics of America. So I would not like to be compared with them. So I'm saying that people in the US, especially in the NRI community, need to think logically that Pakistan, which is discredited across the world, how can their narrative on Kashmir be truthful? This is the country which got created on the basis of a communal ideology, which is two nation theory. This is a country which got a separate state just because they felt that Hindus and Muslims cannot coexist. This is a virulent communal thinking and mindset, and this is the country you are backing. This is the country that participated in September 11 terror attacks. And this is the country you're backing on Kashmir. You should be ashamed of yourself, Pramila Jayapal and Ilhan Umar.
And Aarti, one of the things that I have observed, and this is my personal observations, and the members of the squad somehow seem to exhibit existential angst. I mean, they're always angry. They're angry that the moment their turn comes to speak in any of these hearings, the thing comes into fourth gear. I mean, you can get angry after you make an observation about the dishonesty of it or something like that. No, they start street. And I don't know why they are being so much revered in the Democratic Party. I think Democratic Party may have won a small battle in that Joe Biden got elected, but with these people are as your torchbearers, I'm not sure that it's actually good for the party itself. You need sane, moderate individuals who can actually take the issue by the merits and then make the decisions. Anyway, this is my rant on this.
No, Sree, I want to make a small intervention here, and let me wear the hat of a journalist and an analyst on this particular issue. We shouldn't be surprised by the stand America or American Democrats have taken, especially the squad has taken. Because if you really look at what their stand has had been on, for example, human rights violations committed in Saudi Arabia, if you look at the kind of atrocities that Muslims are committing against Muslims in Syria, in Sudan, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in all the Muslim countries, you shouldn't be, or I shouldn't be surprised by the stand these people have taken, because this has been their consistent stand, that you shut your eyes towards the human rights violations committed by the extremists within the Muslim community. You pin the blame on non-Muslims. And there's a larger strategy to that. There's a bigger issue at that. You know why they do it? They do it because it's the American imperialism and it's the British imperialism that wrecked Muslim societies across the world after the Second World War, after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. It's the British and it's the Americans who went out in the entire Muslim world, where they exploited them for their own strategic interest, whether it was oil, whether it was minerals, whether it was any other thing, whether it was like setting up military bases for their own strategic interests. The white man is fundamentally burdened by his guilt. He is burdened by the fact that he destroyed Muslim societies across the world. It's only India that destroyed itself to save Muslims in the subcontinent. It's only India which gave a chunk of its heart and its mind and its body to Muslims to have peace in 1947 when we created Pakistan. It's only India, even after creating Pakistan, even after giving them land, it's only Indians, it's Indian bureaucracy, it's the Indian state which was complicit in also promoting the Pakistani narrative on Kashmir, because there was a section within India, within Indian state, which was willing to give Kashmir away. we should remember that at one point of time we were almost about to give away Kashmir to Pakistan under Musharraf's 4-point formula. We should also remember that at one point of time we were even willing to consider autonomy to Kashmir just because it's a Muslim majority state in India. So who has been destroying itself? It's whether it's the economy, whether it's society, whether it's politics of India. Who has been destroying itself to accommodate Muslims, to save Muslims from themselves and from outsiders? It's the Indians, it's Hindus, because we philosophically, we fundamentally, we culturally, and civilizationally as well believe in accommodation, in tolerance, in coexistence. That is not true for the West. The West has had a historical war with Islam. That is the war that they have been carrying on, but in a very insidious way, but in a very strategic. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, Artiji, what we will do is we'll take a couple of questions, and then after that, you can have a final statement summarizing your thoughts, and that way we can bring the program to an end in probably about 10 minutes time from now. I just have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask you. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So, Yash Saini wants to know, just like we have a voice of Ilhan Omar for Islamists, can't NRIs elect a Hindu voice in Congress too? What are your thoughts?
I would say that, if we are looking at a counter to Ilhan Omar, yes, indeed, we should have somebody very powerful who can really articulate, and, there are really very, very articulate NRIs in the US who can really counter Ilhan Omar. But the community will have to take a call on that. Since I'm an Indian and you people are US citizens, you will have to
Yes.
take a call on that. I would like to see a counter to Ilhan Omar, except that I would not like to see an unscrupulous version or a counter version of Ilhan Omar. I want a scrupulous, I want a principled NRI, US citizen who can counter Ilhan Omar on facts and on principles.
And it's happening, Artiji and viewers, Yash Sainiji, it is happening. It takes time because, see, somebody is running a campaign because somebody is getting funded from slush funds. Somebody who is on the side of Dharma has to do all the funding themselves. They have to find the wherewithal, the means to put together the money and then go and fight. There are a few warriors like that are coming through the ranks. You just have to give them some more time, and please watch PGurus and you will see the voices and hear them and see what their work is up to. They are fighting in many cases in courts where they felt that their voice was snuffed, and they are winning these battles. After all, remember that America is one of the most compassionate countries. They are willing to back the underdog. This is something that the average American does routinely. So that is the strength for all Americans, all Indian Americans who want to join the political process, that you will have your time in the spotlight, and you will know how to make your point across and win hearts and souls. The next question is from Giridhar Mamidi. Pakistan is able to punch far above its weight in the West. Where has Bharat lost it and failed to counter it effectively?
Well, I think again we are making the mistake that Bharat, India actually had a bargaining chip or had a strategic value or importance for the US. We did not. We should always look at the geopolitics of the world. It's only in the recent years when America has felt insecure about its hegemony, and where it has felt that India can be a counter to contain China. It's only in the recent past where America has realized that India can be of strategic importance. Otherwise, they had no use for us because they saw us as an ally of Soviet Union after we got independence, and they it's only in the last 30 years that situation has improved, relations have improved tremendously after the nuclear deal. And now they're also looking at businesses and trade deals. But we shouldn't really think of India as a strategic ally if there was no China. So that is one. Second, Pakistan has had been an ally of the US from the beginning, from the very creation of Pakistan. It's been
Center, yeah.
in on their side. So also we shouldn't forget that the theater of Cold War for US was Afghanistan, and Pakistan has therefore been of very of huge significance to them, because they were fighting Soviet Union using Pakistan, and of course using Taliban, which later became Al Qaeda. Therefore, Pakistan obviously has a long relationship with Americans. They understand their systems better. Their diaspora has settled in the US, and it's entrenched not as a diaspora, it's entrenched within the Capitol Hill system. It's entrenched within with the Senate and also the Congress. So we shouldn't think that India is something that no country can live without.
And
We have been dispensable, and we are still, I would say, dispensable, because this regime, as far as I can see, the Biden administration is, it's very unlikely that they will decouple their economy from China. It is, I would say, it's naive of India if they think that the Biden administration is going to really take on China, decouple the economy, and all their businesses, the supply chains will shift to India. That's not going to happen. We really need to be pragmatic about it. And second, I would say that even if decoupling happens, it will happen over decades. So India needs to wait.
with that, we bring our hangout with RTG to an end. RTG, some closing comments, and then we can really call this a wrap.
Sree, honestly, I am grateful for this honor, because PGurus has been such a popular platform. People rave about your interviews. People really watch your interviews with a lot of interest, and you are such a great person to talk to as it is. And then one feels really humbled that a man of your wisdom, your seniority, your intellect, and your accomplishments, talking to a person like me, I mean, seriously,
No, it's my pleasure.
I,
Namaskar.
uh, I really feel humbled. And I once again want to tell your audience that I'm a very ordinary journalist. I have worked with all my honesty and integrity, and the only thing that I have always pursued is truth. I became journalist with this mission. I feel that I just want to make one point, that US Congressional hearing, whosoever plotted it against India and against Aarti Tikoo, it was a blessing in disguise for me, because it opened my eyes. It shattered the illusion that I had about the world, about geopolitics, about American democracy, about the West. It brought me face to face with the reality, and the reality is this, that I am an Indian foremost. I will always be an Indian, and I'm proud of my Indian identity. Nobody can shame me for being not just an Indian. Nobody can shame me for being a Hindu. Nobody can shame me for being a Kashmiri Hindu and a displaced Kashmiri Pandit. And I want to say this to Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jaipal, and their gang, that you may think that you have won the battle for America, but unfortunately, you haven't. You have let down American democracy. You have let down America's institutions, because they today no longer remain sacrosanct in the image or in the mind of educated Indians like me. We will call you out for your untruths. We will call you out for fabrication of narrative against India or, for that matter, Hindus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aarti ji. It was a pleasure having you. Namaskar. And we will be back, I'm very sure, with more such conversations with Aarti ji, because I'm sure a lot of you did not know what had transpired that day. And this is actually a microcosm of United States Congress. And I also wonder, how is it that Indian Parliament doesn't come pass comments on Portland burning or Minnesota going up in flames? They never say that these things America should look at, because it's an internal problem. But America doesn't feel that it needs to stay within the constructs of the national boundaries. They want to speak freely about anything and everything. And this is the reason why you're seeing all these fake narratives being manufactured. And as far as New York Times and Washington Post are concerned, I mean, I think even for packing paper, they are not worth it. So let's just leave it at that. They are going to find their own. They are plumbing new depths every day, but it's up to them. That's their audience. They can do whatever they want, because now social media gives you everyone a voice. And let's see how it goes. Thank you very much, and namaskar.
Namaskar.